after a widespread power grid failure left the island in darkness. The blackout, the fourth in 6 months, was attributed to a failure at a substation near Havana. This worsens an already fragile energy system amid the country's economic crisis. Authorities are prioritising power restoration for hospitals and essential services. The Cuban Electricity Union is implementing microsystems to gradually reconnect affected areas. Provinces like Guantanamo, Santiago, Las Tunas and Pinar del Rio have begun partial recovery. Internet and phone services were also disrupted, adding to frustrations. President Miguel Diaz-Canel assured citizens that crews were working intensively to stabilise the grid. A Peruvian fisherman who spent 95 days lost at sea has returned home and had an emotional reunion with his family. 61-year-old Maximo Napa Castro set off for Marcona but a powerful storm pushed him off the course, leaving him adrift in the Pacific Ocean. With no way to call for help, he survived by drinking rainwater and eating insects, birds and even a sea turtle. In his final 15 days, he had no food at all. But after months of searching, an Ecuadorian fishing crew spotted him 680 miles off Peru's coast and brought him rushed to a hospital in Paita, where doctors treated him for severe dehydration. Napa says he never lost hope, drawing strength from thoughts of his mother and 2-month-old granddaughter, who says his survival is nothing short of a miracle. The Crew 10 mission, jointly launched by NASA and SpaceX, is heading to the International Space Station as part of the stranded US nearing its next phase, with the Crew Dragon spacecraft set for rendezvous, docking and hatch opening. Crew 10 was originally supposed to hydraulics issue with ground equipment. Astronauts will now, while Crew 9 delivers their farewell. Astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore have been left at the International Space Station for 9 months and are finally set to return to Earth. Here is what the Associate Administrator Operations said.
Now we wait another day for Crew 10 to mission. Crew 9 there, they'll for a few days, and then we'll bring Crew 9 back to Earth, and they'll splash down and we'll get to hear all their stories.
An oil spill in northwestern Ecuador has led to a state of emergency as crude oil leaked into a major river, contaminating water supplies. Authorities are now rationing drinking water to affected communities. Spill environmental and health concerns as officials rush to contain the damage. Ecuador's government is agencies to assess the full impact of residents' frustration over the lack of clean water and the potential long-term effects on their health and livelihoods. Environmental activists have criticised the government for not implementing stricter safety measures to prevent such accidents. Meanwhile, officials are urging residents to conserve water and remain cautious while the clean-up continues. Here's what a local farmer had to say.
Tengo afectadas algunas hectáreas de cacao que se quemaron. Ese petróleo en el primer momento sale a muy alta temperatura, eso quemaba. De ahí la fauna fluvial, en eso tenemos mucho problema porque muchos muchachos que estaban acostumbrados han tenido que acercarse a...
That is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest news very, very soon. Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Russia and Ukraine have traded aerial strikes overnight, with both nations reporting dozens of enemy drones over their respective territory. The attacks come amid dialogue over a 30-day US ceasefire proposal. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says that military planning to protect a potential Ukraine ceasefire is moving to an operational phase. French President Macron also says Russia has no say if Ukraine wants European peacekeeping troops in the country. US President Donald Trump has launched large-scale strikes on Yemen's Houthi rebels, killing at least 31 people. Iran, who back the Houthis, have responded, saying the US has no authority to dictate its foreign policy. Israeli strikes in Gaza have reportedly killed at least 15 Palestinians in the last 24 hours. As the fragile truce is tested, Israel say they will pursue indirect ceasefire talks with Hamas. NASA's Crew 10 mission has successfully docked at the International Space Station. This marks a key milestone in the long-awaited return of stranded astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams after 9 months in space. At least 34 people have died in America after tornadoes tore through several southern states. More than 170,000 properties were without power as storms flipped cars and flattened buildings. Protests have taken place in Albania over the left-wing government's decision to shut down TikTok, calling the move censorship ahead of parliamentary elections in May. McLaren driver Lando Norris has won the opening race of the 2025 F1 season in Australia in a race full of incidents as rain fell intermittently in Melbourne. Russia and Ukraine continued aerial attacks on each other, inflicting injuries and damages as the fate of a proposed ceasefire to the war continues to remain uncertain. Russia moves closer in the battlefield to ejecting Ukrainian forces from their months-old foothold in the Kursk. In Ukraine, authorities reported several, including on the northern region of Chernihiv, where fires at a high-rise building that was sparked by Russian drone attacks. Ukraine's State of Emergency Service have said. Ukrainian media reported a series of explosions in the region surrounding the capital Kyiv after Ukraine's Air Force issued warnings of a threat of drone attacks on the Kyiv and other central Ukrainian regions. However, there are no official reports on the potential damage in the city. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov spoke recently to discuss the next stage to end the war with Ukraine, hours after Kyiv's allies agreed to exert pressure on Moscow. Despite recent tensions between the US, President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky, Kyiv has agreed in principle to a US-brokered 30-day unconditional ceasefire only if Moscow halts its attacks in eastern Ukraine. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has not, however, agreed to any truce, instead setting conditions that were beyond what was called for in the US agreements. Marco Rubio made the following remarks during an interview in Canada one day ahead of the call.
There has to be some level of concessions. What those concessions are remains to be seen. That'll have to be part of the negotiation. But it's not going to be helpful to enter into those negotiations making blanket statements that may give an excuse for one side or the other not to participate in it. So we'll have to get to that stage where these things are discussed, and ultimately both sides, whatever happens, both sides will have to agree to it, and that's true of any negotiation.
Back in Europe, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Western allies are making plans to support Ukraine if a ceasefire with Russia is agreed. Speaking after a virtual meeting with global leaders, including Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, Starmer said military chiefs would meet next week in the UK to finalise security measures. Although Russia has welcomed the proposal, it continues to demand Ukraine to drop its NATO aspirations and give up territory terms. Starmer stressed that pressure on Moscow would continue, with military aid flowing and economic restrictions tightening on Russia. While France and the UK have signalled they could send peacekeeping troops, Russia remains opposed to any Western troops in Ukraine. To the Middle East, and the first US strikes against Yemen's Houthis since President Donald Trump took office in January has killed at least 31 people, as per the Houthi Health Ministry. This comes after President Trump's post on social media vowing to use overwhelming lethal force against Houthis, citing the Houthis' threat against Red Sea shipping. Trump also warned Iran that it must immediately cut support to the Houthis. In reaction to this, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that Washington has no authority or business to dictate its foreign policy, while he also urged the United States to stop the killing of the Yemeni people. The death toll